Hey everyone, my conversation today is with Anthony Myint, and he's definitely one of the true crusaders of regenerative agriculture and carbon farming as we get into in our conversation. Anthony is one of the creators of Zero Foodprint, a nonprofit that works at the intersection of food and agricultural climate solutions. And Anthony brings a tremendous wealth of knowledge to our conversation today in that he is a chef, he's an author, and he's a food consultant. So I really hope you enjoyed this discussion here with Anthony. I'm Don Davidson. This is the Regenerative Agriculture Club podcast, and please enjoy the following conversation with Anthony Myint. Hello, everyone, and we are live, and I am thrilled to introduce my guest today, and that's Anthony Myint. And Anthony, I'll admit, as I was preparing for our conversation, I wasn't exactly sure how to best introduce you because you're a chef, you're an author, you're a expert food consultant. So if you would, I'm just going to give you the floor and allow you to share, just kind of, who you are and what your path into the food scene has been.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Glad to be here. I'm a big fan of Stuart's work, so it's great to reach your audience and try to collaborate and strategize on ways to build this movement together. At this point, I probably call myself a climate crusader. I began as a chef, as a line cook in San Francisco, and almost improbably became a chef. We started doing pop-ups in 2008. Before that was even a term. We kind of helped usher that into existence. It turned into a permanent pop-up called Mission Chinese. That expanded to New York, and miraculously, it was, even though it was in like a kind of a shitty Thai takeout window, it managed to win New York Times Restaurant of the Year in 2012. And then, the chef and I kind of found ourselves at the chef conferences, like drinking a beer with, Rene Redzepi or Massimo Bottura and like these number one chefs in the world. And fast forward a few years, my wife and I had a daughter, and we just started to think a lot about climate change and the food system and really wanted to get to work on it. So that's how Zero Foodprint began. And then we also started a restaurant out of that called The Perennial that was championing regenerative agriculture.
Okay. So basically, the all three are they all kind of aligned together, or are they three separate entities?
Oh, they're totally separate. So Mission Chinese is it's essentially kind of a party Chinese restaurant, and we're really supporting regenerative ag as part of a circular economy or a regenerative economy where a few cents from each purchase is going to scale carbon farming. Meanwhile, at The Perennial, we were trying to really tell the story of regenerative ag and get, folks excited about carbon ranched beef from the Marine Carbon Project pilots, or Kernza, the perennial grain from the Land Institute, and these kinds of, almost like game-changing agricultural opportunities and world-saving ingredients and things. But what we found was you would get someone excited, hey, here's the Tesla of food, something like that. They pay an extra $1. And then there was no reality in which that $1 was really turning into rapid change on acres. And we can get into the details of some of the carbon farming work if you want, but we started to realize it's not about a few people making a better choice. It's not about a few people shopping at the farmer's market or some snacks that have a regenerative ingredient in the supply chain. It's really necessary to just have a massive shift in food production. And ultimately that just comes down to incentives for healthy soil and kind of creating a regenerative economy overall.
I admit I'm very much an amateur when it comes to just the culinary space and working as a professional chef. So I'm curious, from your standpoint and the work that you've done, how much discussion is there now about the relationship between food and climate change across the chef culture?
On the one hand, chefs are really high integrity operators. They're trying to take care of their guests and the planet, etc. But on the other hand, there's a really big disconnect between a lot of chefs and farming. Even chefs that buy from good farmers may not necessarily be able to define healthy soil. I know I couldn't for many years, probably. I'd give you a dumb answer if you asked me, but now it's pretty clear to me. Healthy soil is soil with a lot of living things in it. How do we get that? How would you get a farmer to switch from conventional to regenerative practices that build healthy soil? if they have subsidies from the Farm Bill and crop insurance and all these things for their conventional production, it's just really hard to make that switch. There needs to essentially just be no barriers at all, including no financial barriers. And so that's really where our work is geared now. We began a collaboration with the California Department of Food and Ag in 2019 and, really started fleshing out almost like a system to allow the citizen or the consumer or the business or anybody to change acres. And I mean, that sounds kind of simple, but if you think about it, you as a consumer, there's no way you could have a dollar, and say like, I want to direct this to a farmer to help them plant cover crops or, reduce tillage or apply compost, manage the way cattle graze. There's no pathway for that to happen, right? You could buy something from a good producer, and then what are the chances that their neighbor takes out a loan for $500,000 and starts making these changes? Of course, that doesn't happen. So we're trying to just make that possible. And I can get into tons of detail on like how the program works specifically, if that's appealing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually, before we get to that, I want to kind of lead in with the term that you mentioned earlier, which is carbon farming, and which I think is just, I just like that because I know it's pretty much, equal to regenerative farming, but it adds that climate context to that. So can you talk more about like, how you start to incorporate just that phrasing of regenerative farming and how you define that with those that you interact with most?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time I'm switching, between regenerative agriculture, carbon farming, healthy soil, soil carbon. It almost just comes down to kind of like good farming in a way, or farming with nature. But I guess I would say a lot of the important principles of carbon farming would be to build up the biomass in the soil and also like some woody biomass above soil. But then what's really exciting for us is that, in the past few years, I think there's been a lot of breakthroughs in like biogeochemistry and other fields that are finding that nature can essentially, take a little bit of boost from a shift in farming and then scale up the carbon sequestration on its own. So the best example of that for me is a practice like applying compost on rangeland. So, if you imagine like a rancher or a dairy person, there's very little financial incentive right now in the food system to like go, buy 15 tons of compost and spread it on each acre, right? Like there's no product, there's no way to charge an extra dollar for doing that, et cetera. But that kind of practice jumpstarts the rangeland, soil biology, and then it can take in, many tons of carbon per acre per year from one single compost application. And what's happening is not just an increase in the living soil biology, as that soil biology is kind of like cycling through its life cycle and, dying and pooping and peeing, or, the equivalent for soil biology. It's building up occluded and heavy fraction carbon that could be in the soil for, decades or millennia. And so this is, to my knowledge, new science as of like 2018. So, we're in a moment of like, there's all these talking heads, there's a lot of static or, different opinions on all these things. But it's actually like there's a paradigm shift in the science of soil biology. And we can actually like, take half of all the excess carbon, maybe all the excess carbon out of the atmosphere if we get started.
I think that's a wonderful introduction now to diving into more of the detail around Zero Foodprint. So could you just kind of get into, the origin story of that and that initial launch and then also and how you began connecting with your initial members?
Yeah, well, I mean, the real origin story, we kind of took the same approach a lot of the sustainability movement is geared towards, which is kind of like do less harm, reduce your carbon footprint. So we started with life cycle assessments, restaurants trying to go carbon neutral. What we started to realize over time is like, that is essentially kind of like an audit or a purity contest and people doing, making the best choices they can. But it's not really just like this potential for like floodgates opening and a new normal. And so what we really got excited about when we began this collaboration with California state agencies was the idea that, it is possible to change millions of acres. So basically, we have this opportunity at the moment where, if you think back to renewable energy like 30 years ago or something like that, it would be really far-fetched, I think, to at that time for people to say hey, a whole city can just switch to renewable energy, right? Like that probably didn't seem possible a couple decades ago. Now that seems like that's happening. Hundreds of cities have made that kind of commitment. And so one model that allows for individual cities and counties to move more quickly than, federal will or state government or something is called community choice aggregation. And we don't need to get into the wonky terms, but, it's basically like a citizen can send $5 a month to improve the grid. So as we're sitting here in drought, wildfire, soil depletion, according to the UN, only 60 harvests remaining in the world, all these things, it feels inevitable that we have to change acres towards regenerative. By the same token, with organic, for example, after 50 years, the whole consumer-led organic movement has changed 1 or 2% of acres. So that idea of let's just, shop at the farmer's market, let's support the good farmer, please do that. That's absolutely critical. But we can't bank society on, that changing acres. And so the logic from California was basically well, why don't we just create a funding mechanism, a way to use capital to change acres? Let's try to unlock that collective action. Let's make it possible to improve the grade of food, with a couple cents per purchase, let's say. And so the California restaurant industry pre-COVID could have generated $970 million a year to scale regenerative farming, to help farmers plant cover crops and apply compost and all these things. Of course, the person paying $10 would now be paying $10.10 for the sandwich or something like that. The kale salad would go from $12 to $12.12. It probably should have been that all along. But we have an opportunity to do that and really create that new normal. The issue is it's complicated to get the money to the farms. And so basically, since 2020, Zero Foodprint, started making these kinds of grants. So we've been working closely with conservation districts, the UC Cooperative Extension, basically these trusted conservation networks to have farmers apply for grants, receive the funds, and implement the practices. And so, it's different from some of the other work going on like carbon markets, and it's different from government grants because it's engaging consumers to allow this movement to occur more quickly than just a couple $1 million in a given, budget cycle from the government. One thing that makes it possible is this modeling tool, the Comet Planner. And so this just came out in 2017, but it basically is a collaboration between Colorado State and the USDA that allows, a farmer, a business person, a policymaker to estimate how much carbon a given practice takes out of the atmosphere and turns into soil carbon. And so, this is a screenshot from a compost application project. This is a picture from the actual project that we did in Sonoma with Trash Dairy. So this 23-acre project is expected to remove about 99.1 tons of carbon per year. And then this is the last slide, and so I'll get back into conversation after this, but basically this is a peek at our grant database, and it helps illustrate, how we're deciding which projects receive the funds. So each row is an applicant, a farmer applicant. I'll run through the top one. This farmer is saying they want to apply compost and mulch, plant trees and shrubs on 18 acres. The farmer is working with the UC, in this case, UC Agricultural and Natural Resources, so the Cooperative Extension. And so they submit the application. They want $14,000 to do the work. We view that as both a grant request and sort of a competitive bid. And so that we pair that dollar amount with the cost that the technical assistance provider needs to walk the land, make sure the practices are done at NRCS standards, take pictures, and basically just validate it. And so the total cost is $16,000. We're dividing that by the total carbon modeled estimate from Comet on the previous page. And then there's a dollars per ton of carbon. So we call that kind of like the climate ROI in a way. You can just think of it as like the best bang for the buck. But so the purpose of this is just to say this is a systematic approach to improved land stewardship. So now you could start taking, $50,000 from a government budget, $5 per month from the trash bill, 10 cents from a sandwich, $10 a month from just an individual who wants to support carbon farming in their own state or something, and just funnel all that money to directly make this change on acres. And so this, to my knowledge, wasn't possible before, but is possible now.
That's great. So is there a typical profile or similar characteristics of the food businesses that utilize the Zero Footprint platform?
Well, that's a great question. And I feel like, we kind of began with like this cool kids club of like Michelin star chefs or this sort of thing. And, at this point now we've got, folks like a Subway franchisee in Boulder, Colorado, with 5 locations supporting regenerative ag. And so we really view it as more of a table to farm movement instead of a farm to table movement, and, really making it possible for any business. We even have like two compost companies in Colorado, wineries, caterers. So really like small groceries. So anybody who wants to now has a way to take local climate action by building healthy soil.
And then for, let's say like someone out there is really giving thought to utilizing what you all do and possibly reaching out. Any minimum requirements that they should meet first before you would consider them to adding them to the platform?
That's a great question. But basically, on the business side, we began as a restaurant program because that's my background. But at this point now, we, our Restore California and Restore Colorado programs are basically just taking any money at all and then optimally and equitably distributing it to farms to fight climate change and grow better ingredients. And then Zero Foodprint, like the consumer-facing program with the restaurants and businesses, is almost like a funding engine that's bringing that money in so that we can distribute it. So they're really separate, but we'll welcome any funds and any business that wants to contribute. We do have kind of like a process in terms of like how you represent that to the customers. So everything's above board and stuff. We're glad to have anybody join this movement.
Can you talk a little bit about what your geographical footprint looks like now? Because in kind of looking at your roster, I saw on the website, and now it seems like your reach is not just in the U.S., but now is becoming global.
We recently just began some affiliate programs in Asia and the Nordic region, and I think next week in Germany, some folks are starting up. And basically, they're just creating this same kind of circular regenerative economy in those regions where a few cents per purchase can go towards helping farmers make this shift. We kind of share information with them and help them try to, establish that and connect with local, soil scientists and different things. But in a lot of ways, those are their programs. In the US, we, anybody nationwide could start putting money in. At the moment, we're funding projects in Colorado, California, and coming soon in Georgia. And then we're hoping to expand soon to the Northeast and the Northwest. But at this time, primarily our efforts are focused in California and Colorado.
Now, certainly the pandemic hit every business that's affiliated with food. Any substantial pivots that you all had to make and just to kind of navigate the process that we all went through?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly as a restaurant operator, the pandemic was tough. We had to close the New York location of Mission Chinese during the pandemic. Our Brooklyn location is still open. But, I think for a lot of us who, managed to make it through the pandemic, it's still hard to staff. Everything's still hard. But there's probably also kind of almost a wish to not just go back to business as usual. And so I think that both in terms of like living wage and equity, but also in terms of, the environment, I think a lot of people are looking for ways to be part of the solution. So I think what is, ostensibly a setback for our program is also like kind of an opportunity for more folks to kind of like pause, and start to realize like we actually have to change the system. We can't just like, ignore the problems and stuff, like, almost like this is maybe getting political a little bit, but, I almost feel like pre-COVID, I would have just hoped that like politicians would solve a lot of the problems. But we're seeing now, like, when lives are at stake, like next week, next month, politicians are not necessarily making the right choices. And so I think when it comes to something as distant and abstract as climate, like, I think we all have to start working on it and moving towards solutions ourselves to help lead the way.
So on that topic, certainly then just getting your messaging out is a core asset and driver of that effort. So I'm curious, can you touch on just what you found successful in terms of just marketing outreach? Any tips out there, just for chefs out there that want to share what they're doing with their customers and any advice that you have on that front?
Well, thanks. I mean, we try to provide all the members with assets and ways to tell the story. But I think part of it goes back to that disconnect, first of all, that I don't know that very many consumers understand regenerative agriculture. I don't know that many consumers have even been wishing they had a way to improve the food system. They kind of maybe loosely wish the ingredients were more nutritious and all these things. But they're not actually trying to, unlock change or whatever. And so it's pretty hard to communicate how this works. That said, I feel like when it's just part of business as usual, like when it's part of this new normal and a restaurant like Subway or whatever is just sending a few cents to Healthy Soil, then it also is kind of like a no-brainer, and a lot of research suggests that consumers will pay 35% more for the sustainable thing. And 88% of consumers want, brands and businesses to just take care of climate change on their behalf and all these things. And so, the ask here is just send 1 penny from the dollar to fight climate change and grow better food. It's a no-brainer. But how to kind of go from zero ever to that 1 penny is a pretty tough challenge. So if you figure it out, let me know.
Still work in progress on my part too. So certainly, it would be a poor form on my part if I didn't highlight 2 prestigious awards that you have won in recent years. And I'll start with the first one, the Basque Culinary World Prize. Can you touch on that and the work that you did that led up to that award?
Well, thanks. That was an award for me as a chef, and definitely a huge honor. The award is for chefs and for gastronomy that is kind of doing work to improve society outside the kitchen. And it came also with prize money that really was instrumental in helping Zero Foodprint grow. I think there was a little bit of a transition around that because that was almost when we were making the shift from kind of leading the farm to table regenerative charge at the perennial to kind of trying to level up to systems change. And so it both felt like we were just getting started, but also a really good way to kind of signal that healthy soil and climate solutions are possible, even for the restaurant industry.
And then the second award is actually how I first discovered Zero Footprint, and that is the Humanitarian of the Year honor that you received from the James Beard Foundation. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, so that really is a credit to my wife Karen and the team and all of us. But basically, to me, the fact that organizations like James Beard are switching from kind of the yummies and just patting chefs on the back for their great dishes and starting to shift towards impact and recognizing sustainability initiatives and really trying to lead that charge is pretty exciting. James Beard has been doing these boot camps with chefs for years now, where they take chefs to learn more about the food system and to potentially advocate for policy change and different things. So we're really excited to, first of all, have the recognition, but second of all, hopefully have closer connections with James Beard on, spreading regenerative agriculture and healthy soil in restaurants.
Let's say if we were going to pass, say 10 years ago, were conversations around the culinary scene, could you compare that since you've been in the space for so long?
Well, the whole, when we were first doing pop-ups, it was when food blogs just started almost. And, so I almost feel everything has changed now, in terms of you chefs are learning from each other on TikTok and YouTube, and, a Michelin-starred chef's recipe is in a diner in, Nashville a week later. So I feel like it's totally possible for, regenerative ag and healthy soil to kind of there's not even enough supply. Like, even if you just were like, okay, I'm going to start buying regenerative now, there's no supply. So we need to just work together on helping farmers change and make that shift.
So with the work that you're doing today, I mean, do you have any set goals with you and your team in terms of like what you want to achieve? Like, what are the most impactful items that you want to accomplish in the next few years?
Well, thanks. We probably measure success in terms of like just the carbon sequestration. So just the amount of carbon coming out of the atmosphere, turning into healthy soil. So my goal probably is just to like double that every year. So since we started in 2020, we've distributed about $500,000 and helped remove about 18,000 tons of carbon. So that's equal to not burning something like 2 million gallons of gas. So like a real impact. And it's really just coming from this, couple cents per purchase and other things. And so, if we can just double that every year at least, that would be a simple goal.
Anthony, this has been an absolute joy to have you hang here with us today. I'm going to give you the last word. Where can folks follow along with all the work that you and the team are doing and stay in touch with the progress that you're making?
Well, thanks, Don. It's been a really great conversation, and I really love what Stuart is doing too. I think, sign up for our newsletter. It's your Foodprint, but go beyond signing up for the newsletter. Start sending $10 a month to carbon farming. If your region doesn't compost, start composting. Find a way to do that, or talk to your local, city council or something and make it happen. I think basically, there's so many incentives from the federal government or just the food economy that almost are all incentivizing unhealthy soil. And I think if you really get to the heart of it, like a lot of society's problems come down to that, like, obesity, like chronic disease, environment, inequity, like all these different things. And so, if you want to make a difference in your own backyard and your own community, I think that building healthy soil and supporting farmers in the shift to regenerative ag is the most important thing you can do.
I can't top that. All right, everyone. He's Anthony Myint. We'll link up all of his links in the show notes. Stay in touch, follow their work, and hopefully, Anthony, we could do a round 2 sometime in the future. Love to have you back.